Racism is absolutely alive and well in this country.
There was a lot of anger because there's so much hurt.
Reconciliation is not my responsibility, is not just Indigenous people's responsibility. Let's change, let's transform, let's heal. Welcome to Two Aunties and Reconciliation. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to episode 4, where we're going to discuss harm, racism, and discrimination of Indigenous peoples throughout Canada, or just as a whole, as human beings in this world. And for those that viewers that are just joining us, or this is your first episode watching, I am Shelley Joseph. My given English name is Chief Leanne Joe. I'm one of 16 hereditary chiefs of the Squamish Nation. And my co-host here, I will let her introduce herself. And we have an amazing guest with us today, and I'll let her introduce herself as well, but I'll pass it over to Shelley.
Gela Kesla, Nugwa Hekwagila Ogwa. Gela Kesla in Kwakwala, my traditional language, means come well with me. Come well on this journey that we're going to have together, speaking to this important topic. So Gela Kesla. My traditional name is Hekwagila Ogwa. My English name is Shelley Joseph. I'm the youngest daughter of Chief Robert Joseph and my late mother, Donna Joseph. Mother, grandmother, auntie. Really happy to be here with you today.
Thank you. Stephanie,
Yeah,
you introduce yourself. That'd be great.
thank you. Good morning. My name is Stephanie Marinick. I am an Ojibwe woman from Barons River First Nation in Manitoba. My mother is Jennifer Patrick. My sister is Misty Patrick. My father was of Sikh descent, but I don't know a lot about him, and I grew up with a settler family. I was impacted and removed from my home due to the 60s scoop. So I feel blessed that I was raised with lots of love, and as I get older and reconnect with my family and my community, I just keep getting surrounded with more and more love. But really grateful to be here today and join in this really important discussion.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being with us, Stephanie, and joining this conversation, which is probably, it's a difficult one. I think there's going to be a lot of emotion and storytelling and sharing that needs to be done around this topic, because, let's do some truth telling that racism is absolutely alive and well in this country. It is alive and well for pretty much anybody that is of not, privileged, white, and typically male or female in that spectrum. And so any person of color or any person that is, sort of outside those really small parameters, faces racism, faces bias, faces discrimination. And more importantly, I want to call out the truth that harm is around us when that's alive and well on a daily basis. We feel that harm hits us. And, I want to acknowledge that truth. That's the reason I want to, not only call it out, but just have conversation around it and put, I think, lived experience to that for our viewers, so that, I think they become familiar but uncomfortable with that truth. And, I don't mean to be insensitive, but I'm comfortable with your uncomfortableness, and and not that means that I don't have empathy and sympathy for both those that are inflicted with that harm, but those that cause that harm. But I'm also here to say it's enough. Like, let's stop, let's change, let's transform, let's heal, let's move into forgiveness, let's move into love. We spoke a lot about that in our other episodes. That comes up a lot around how do we just acknowledge each other as beautiful human beings and start from there, right? Because it's really that simple.
It is.
It's not a hard place to be. And I think the other thing that I think we have to acknowledge to get there is a choice. Let's acknowledge that it's a choice, that every single human being gets to choose how they are with others. And again, my call to action is, let's let that land and have conversation about that. But I'm going to ask, do each of you want to share anything specifically before we delve into it a bit deeper about harm, bias, racism, discrimination in general, right? Did you want to share a bit more that I didn't touch on?
I just want to add that every person in this country needs to do that inventory that you were talking about. Check your biases. Everybody has them. You may think you don't just because it's not at the forefront of our minds on a daily basis, but my call to action is bring it to the forefront of your mind. Check your biases. Why do you have it? Where did it come from? What purpose has it served? And what can you do now to move forward in a better way?
Exactly. Stephanie, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think about, my personal experience and, being raised by settler family, I definitely faced racism, but didn't really understand it
Right.
as I was growing up. And as I sort of, reconnected with my own community and my identity is when I really started to open my eyes and understand um, how I had had a bit of protection being raised in a settler family. And I still, I'm sure, have that privilege that I carry with me. But it also helps drive me to, make sure that, young people aren't impacted by these biases. People are more aware that there's truth shared about the reality of how we treat Indigenous people across this country and in all the spaces. So I think about that when I go into these conversations that are addressing harm that happens because it happens every single day.
Exactly. It's everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, this is an assumption, and I'm happy to check that assumption. But I believe that most Canadians are truly not aware of the amount of harm through all of those spaces that, again, we literally are faced with on a daily basis. And in particular, what that looks like, right? When I share about harm in the work that I do, what comes up when I speak about that is, okay, so this is how it shows up in media, right? And I think the struggle um, with settler Canadians is they're like, but it's not directed specifically at you. And I'm like, but I am Indigenous. I'm a matriarch. I am head of a family. But most importantly, I'm a mom. So yeah, that impacts me. When something is very negative or racist or discriminatory or oppressive, or is based in bias that comes out in even a social media post or a big national paper post or on the news, etc., that impacts me.
Absolutely. I think a big part of that is while the story may be about another family or another person experiencing that directness of harm, we're all triggered because we've experienced it
Exactly.
at some other time on some other level.
Exactly.
And so we connect instantly with that family's
Absolutely.
pain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the trauma and the trigger and everything that comes up with that harm that we faced, and it may not be exactly the same,
Yeah.
but we know exactly how it feels.
Yeah. And truly empathize
Mm-hmm.
in really deep ways. I don't think they understand.
No.
Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge that. I want to call that out that, it is the responsibility and I think also the accountability for settler Canadians to know that truth. That, it may not be directed specifically at me or even us personally, but it does, have impact
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
For sure. I mean, we live in this country that's built its reputation on being kind and welcoming, and
Generous.
we're the generous country. Meanwhile, there's been this deep, dark secret for so long, and so it is uncomfortable for people, and it's scary for them to even consider that this country has inflicted so much harm. And I think that's where the challenge comes in having those uncomfortable conversations.
Yes.
I have those uncomfortable conversations within my own family. And I have some family members who are open and want to sort of learn and take that initiative to understand. And then I have the other ones who are happy to live in oblivion despite having two daughters who are Indigenous who are from the 60s scoop. Right. And so it shows up all the time. And let's just address the fact that it's uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable, but it needs to be talked about. It needs to be understood.
And I think the thing for me too, when they're uncomfortable, when it becomes, you can feel it in your body uncomfortable, is where we really need to sit in it even more, right? We just have to be with it. And the reason I really push that is I do not want our children sitting here having the same conversations, asking for the same things, for wanting to do the work because nobody did it before, and I want, that's what I remind everybody when I do, the work outside of this space and what I'm doing here as well is saying, do you want your children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews having to do this work for you when we all have the responsibility and accountability to do it now? Because we can. We're capable. We have the strength, we have the resiliency, we have the wherewithal. We do know better. And if we don't, you can find out how to do better. Therefore, we should, right? And it's not a pretty, would be cool to have. It's a must have, right? And I go to just all of the stories I could share, and I'm sure each of you can share around how each of us has faced racism, how each of us has faced biases, how each of us has faced immense oppression, in particular being Indigenous women in this country, as well as discrimination, like just all of these things, stereotyping, like you name it. We probably don't have enough time in the episode just to share our stories.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of thing. But yeah. So let's delve deeper into, I guess, how all of these things are built into our institutions, into the systems, because that literally the upholding of colonization is in all of those spaces, right? Upholding of capitalism is in all of those spaces. And again, how do we begin to decolonize and reconcile and bring in other worldviews, in particular an Indigenous worldview, into those spaces? So I'm going to begin with asking our guest who has worked in and still works within the space of the educational system, which is a very large institutional space in our country because almost every single person globally says the best path for you is to continue your education. Yeah. Right. And go get formally educated. And, but I know these institutions were not built with our worldview in mind, with our epistemology, ontology, our lens, nothing about who we were was built into these systems. And of course, again, our overcolonial in many spaces. But Stephanie, would you be willing to share a bit about your lived experience within the education institution around this particular topic of
What a big question. Working within the post secondary education system is kind of like the Wild West when it comes to that understanding, and even where people are on their journey of reconciliation and learning and all of that. You would think because they're post-secondary and they're all focused on education, they'd have a better idea of how to approach this problem. But I think it's that, these institutions are so deeply rooted. They're so old. They are built upon privilege and protection, academic freedom that gets thrown around a lot to, I guess, make up for some of the comments or ideas that people feel they can stand proudly in, which are harmful to our people. I think about these young people that come in. I'm in a space where I directly interact with all of our Indigenous students. I oversee our Indigenous Student Center, and when I first arrived at my current position, it was really sad. It was really sad. There was this beautiful space, but there was so much exclusion and siloizing of Indigenous, period, across the institution that nobody wanted to step in and support or take the lead to understand, why do we have employee retention issues? Why aren't our students using our space? Why can't we build programming? Why can't we talk about, why does it have to be an Indigenous person speaking to an Indigenous prospective student? Like, you can't answer the simple questions. It could just be tuition questions, and it automatically just got shifted to us. And so that puts in that added layer of this poor student reached out to get some information because they want to pursue post-secondary, because that's what they've been told is the path forward. And then immediately it's like, oh, Indigenous person, I'm so scared. Let's send them to the Indigenous people. And so then they have to go through another person. And it delays
it
everything.
just creates, I think, a barrier because they're sitting there going, what's going on?
Yeah.
Instantly othered.
Instantly othered. That is a great way to capture it. And so, what I've really worked at in my current role is relationships, because people need to understand who we are. We're not some mystical, race that's romanticized, and we all have long flowy hair and wear beads all the time. We we live in this society just like everybody else. We're just more grounded in who we are. And we know what's right and what isn't right, and we're okay to talk about it. And it makes people uncomfortable because we're so comfortable in talking about it, I think, is part of the problem.
Right.
Right. And so, it was just, I knew that the only way that I could do anything positive within my role was to just get to know everybody. Every single piece, every single department, they all touch our students. They all impact that student experience, whether it's, Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And we should all want to just make sure it's the best student experience from when we first start that conversation to when they reach out for more information and guidance. And it shouldn't matter who they talk to. They shouldn't feel like, oh, I'm Indigenous and now I'm not allowed to talk to the white people.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a strange space.
Right.
Yeah. But what I learned as I started to build those relationships and, create more awareness about our programming in our center, and have the students feel comfortable because they had this great team of Indigenous people they can come and just hang out with or talk to. And they started sharing and opening up about their experiences across the institution. And that's where I was like, oh, there's still so much work, stereotyping and racism and tokenizing and inappropriate questions because you're the Indigenous person in the room, in the classroom, right? And this impacts our students. Our students aren't just in Indigenous studies courses, they're in every course, right? And so the level of misunderstanding or just like confusion about how do you be in relationship with Indigenous people is baffling because we're just people,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Yeah, but people like go all over the place and they're like, oh, well, you're the Indigenous person. You must know about all
Right.
Indigenous things. And so, I'm gonna, have maybe inappropriate conversations in emails with you because I need to learn to decolonize my own work. And so like the leveraging of the students to like indigenize or decolonize their coursework is wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that was that was a big issue that we faced just this past spring. And I was like,
Wow.
what is happening? And, to try to work with this person in kindness, respecting privacy and stuff. I had a relationship with this person and I was really respecting both the student privacy, the instructor privacy, and approached it in a different way. And the instructor just blew it all up and broke all sorts of privacy and all this stuff. And I'm like,
Yes.
and it was so grounded and I know what I'm doing. And I.
Well, and that's
Right?
what
I did nothing wrong. And this student has always been a problem and she won't interact and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, do you think about how you were approaching the student and what you were asking of them?
right.
Like, how did that make them feel? Like, but no
Well,
consideration.
I think that goes to, again, this colonialism, capitalism, and the approach that is so ingrained in Canadian society and in a lot of global, spaces of extraction, 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 extraction.
Yes.
Because I have to learn. I need to know this is good for my research or etc. Like again, it's a worldview, lens, epistemology, ontology that is not of us. That's not our approach. That's not how we do things or how we see things or how we're in relationship with each other, etc.
Yeah.
Like just the immense amount of harm. Just from just that one story is
Oh, yeah. And the fact that the instructor just couldn't even see it, couldn't even see that, their approach and this individualistic of like, well, I'm doing all the right things. I. And no consideration of like that overall impact to that student and how, that not only impacted the student's experience, but also like their own like, when you're being sort of pointed out in a crowd of
Right.
white students as the Indigenous expert because you're an Indigenous student, how uncomfortable is that?
right. Exactly.
Right? And like just no ability to see any of that harm. And just so believed so strongly that they were doing the right thing because they came from some challenging experiences, so they understood.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Sorry.
didn't mean to laugh out loud. It's a real thing. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, the blinders are.
Yeah, the blinders are really, really big.
I was super curious. Like, not that we have to answer this now, but my curiosity is does this, how many individuals like this think that that's like reconciliation?
Lots.
Well, I've seen it immensely throughout a lot of the spaces, as well. And I want to share, I think about how books are written, how media is written, how news is told, right? That sort of thing. And it very much is that space of saviorism, of we're poor,
Yes.
uh,
Poor helpless
helpless,
Indigenous
heathen savages that need to be saved, right? And we need to become civilized still, I guess. I'm not sure. Like, I don't know where every single individual comes from, but that saviorism of like, and I guess I'm here to say, to our viewers and to those that will be listening, I don't need to be saved
No.
at all. At all. Like 100%, 150, 200, 1,000%. I do not need to be saved. I know who I am. I know where I come from, who I belong to. I know what my purpose is, and I know where I'm going. I know how I'm going to get there. If I don't, that's okay. I'm smart enough. I'm brilliant enough. I'm gifted enough to know that I'll figure it out. I'm resilient as well, right? I have immense lived experience to help me along that way. So I guess a call to action here is stop trying to save us.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that, we have Indigenous people in these spaces, in these post-secondary institutions, these colonial institutions, because we're grounded in who we are. We're resilient. We know our voices. But, these students are still, some of them are still figuring out their paths.
Exactly.
And so being surrounded by a bunch of white saviors is really challenging. And so, without, some institutions still don't really have Indigenous departments.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're like, what about these poor students that are in these institutions? Who's speaking up for them, right? And so I think there's still so much work to be done. And even in some of the institutions that have these Indigenous roles, it's, kind of just to ensure that they tick that box of, yeah, we have Indigenous people in our institution, and they're in charge of doing all the Indigenous stuff, right? So
And it perpetuates,
perpetuate.
continues.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that space. I mean, I think it touches on a lot of everything that, has to come to light. I'd love to kind of go maybe do a little more sharing, I guess, around, again, harm, racism, discrimination, oppression, biases, and that sort of thing. I guess maybe more on I guess, a personal level rather than an institutional or systems level. Right. Because it comes at us in every direction, every day, all the time. And maybe I'll turn to Shelley and if there's anything that you wanted to share with our viewers and listeners about uh, this particular space. And
I have so many stories of personal experiences of being profiled and, because I'm Indigenous. And, there are people who are Indigenous that can pass for white.
right.
And it's my hope, a lot of them do use that to their advantage, which
Yes.
I think is a really good thing. And then they help other people. First in elementary grade play, I had a teacher who was so outwardly racist. You'll never amount to anything and you're wasting space in my classroom. All of grade 4 was just a nightmare. And, that just silenced me even more. I was a quiet little girl growing up off reserve in an all white community neighborhood. It was kind of rough. And, then we get to biases. That created a bias in me because her words and behaviors and attitudes towards me were so hurtful. I decided that she had a strong French accent.
Mm-hmm.
So from then, grade 4, my bias was that I hated all French people.
Yeah, of course.
Like I
Right.
couldn't read French, couldn't hear French. Nobody could have a French accent because then I'd instantly be like rolling my eyes and
Right.
like, turning my whole body chemistry just changed, until I did that inventory for myself and realized where it came from. This was my grade 4 teacher. But I carried that my whole life and didn't know myself the harm that I did to. There's probably some really wonderful French people that came into my life. But because I had this bias because of my experience, they were pushed hard and fast
Right.
away from me.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I find that brings up for me, because if we're talking about a foreign language,
Mm.
what comes up for me, even like almost every single day, like we are filming this in, the greater Vancouver area and born and raised, on the beautiful shores of North Vancouver. You walk around, and because we are such a diverse city, you hear literally every language spoken everywhere all the time. And I will own, wholly own that it triggers me. It bothers me. It upsets me. Sometimes it's really strong. Sometimes it doesn't, really, it's a tinge there, but then I let it go. But when it's really there, like I just feel like literally yelling at those people. Do you understand how lucky you are that you get to freely speak your language out
In
in
this
public
country.
in this country? And my my chichia, my grandmother's, my mom's dialect died with her, right? And that's what button gets pushed when, and I want to get so angry, just so angry. And I own that. I own that as my trigger. I own that I have to continue to forgive. I need to heal. I need to move through that space. But it just reminds me of, again, what we talked about, in our other episodes of the elimination of our identity, our languages, everything about who we are. I mean, let's again call out the truth that they were literally, trying to commit genocide of getting rid of all of us, through either, you know, killing us all and or killing anything about who we are in us, right? Kind of thing. But yeah, that's I think one thing that I don't share out publicly with everybody all the time. That's a huge trigger for me still because I do not speak any of my languages, right? And nor does my husband, because we are the first generation to not have gone to residential school. All
Yeah.
our parents went to residential school.
Yeah.
All of our grandparents went to residential school. All of our aunts and uncles went to residential school. My husband even went to day school.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this isn't, again, a historical.
Yeah. Not history.
No, it's not that long ago.
No.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess that's one thing that came up when, like you were sharing of like, oh yeah, then no, that's still a big trigger for me. And I wholly own it and work through it. But
Same.
the fact that I have to is, I think, what really bothers me the most. Right? That
Yeah.
I, as a human being, have to continue healing and working on this. And again, call to action to our viewers and our listeners of like, you need to do the same work as well.
Yeah.
If we can take responsibility for checking our biases and checking how we are in these spaces and how we're reacting, and we're willing to do the work, then we ask you to do the same.
Yeah, where they came from. You mentioned these old the institutions are go back to the beginning of the creation of Canada, really. And those mindsets, that's what's still existing from how many generations ago. And on that side of the coin, it's been normalized. And so I think people, might think, well, why should I change? It's always been like this. Because it's always been like this. That's why you need to change.
Well, and that brings up for me, have you had conversation about the future of your children, your grandchildren, your godchildren, your nieces, your nephews? Like, I look to my son, and the future that he wants is not what is being laid. That's not what he wants.
Yeah.
He wants what we're talking about.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to walk into a store and be racially profiled.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be going to work and being called out for wearing an Indigenous something on his person, being questioned, like, about that, because that's happened. I'm not sharing this because it's this has all happened, right? Don't want to be going into stores and be followed by security or denied service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My son has been denied service, right? And we're talking about a child.
Yeah.
We're not even talking an adult. Like, I've experienced everything under the sun. I'm sure each of us has. But the fact that it's happening to our children that's where I call out, we have to do better. We have to be better. We have to do exactly what you're talking about. Because, just because you and your children don't experience it doesn't mean that any person of color, an Indigenous person, or diverse individual isn't experience that every single day.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's why I want to talk about this. That's why I wanted to call out this truth and have this uncomfortable conversation. It's not uncomfortable for us, right? Because I experience it and live it every single day, systematically, institutionally, in media, right? In corporations, you know, going to a bank,
Oh, yeah.
right?
All the institutions, financial, the
Yeah.
justice, education, the healthcare systems. You know, I remember seeing posts on Facebook, a relative, she showed a photo of herself, like, dressed to the nines, like, gowned up, and, like, she was going to a gala, and she said, a lot of times this is how I feel I have to dress when I'm going to emergency so that I can be treated well.
That's like insanity.
Yeah.
I remember doing some work, uh, and I spoke to about harm, racism, discrimination, oppression within the healthcare system. And I literally just did a call out on social media, 2 social media platforms only, and did a call out because, of course, I have a huge network of Indigenous professionals and peers and friends across the country. I got so many stories back.
Yeah.
Like, and these weren't even like, this were just recent stories of themselves, family, community, nation members that experienced all of those things in the healthcare system. And the story that stuck out with me the most was a peer whose father went to emergency twice with COVID. They did not treat him, and he ended up passing.
Yeah.
Jeez. Just because he was Indigenous,
Of course.
right? And again, just not that it blows my mind. It just when a person, like, how many, this goes to a topic that we're going to be discussing in another episode, around murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and other individuals that are diverse or, that are the most vulnerable, right? I mean, I'm super cognizant of literally walking anywhere by myself as an Indigenous woman.
Yep.
Right? And I think that's a truth that I think Canadians need to hear, that, I do not walk generally without my son or my husband or somebody with me, right?
Yep.
Where I'm exposed, but I also carry things with me to protect myself as well, so that I can defend myself if
Yeah.
anything ever came up.
I was raised with the same caution. Taught really young how to defend myself. Yeah. And then when I had my daughters, I did the same thing with them. You're going to have to know how to, defend yourself, fight off predators or.
Well, and I think that even extends even to all young people today, because, my son is a big fellow.
Yes, he is.
He's tall. He's, and he's pretty skookum. And, doesn't have a slight build or anything like that. But we have him in martial arts so that he could defend himself. Just because men and boys are just as prone to violence and aggression in this country as women, as Indigenous peoples. But also, again, I'm going to call out truth. Raised our son to never trust a police officer. Right? Beautiful human beings out there that are police officers. Right? However, just like any other institution in space, they are not all the same. And there are that institution, again, we spoke in an episode about how the RCMP was built, designed to be used against us.
Yep.
And I said, and the thing is I've always shared with our son of, don't trust them until they've earned it, until they've proven that they can be trusted, that you can be safe with them, and that they are going to treat you fairly. But until that point, you go in eyes wide open, and, and to me, that's, how sad is that? How sad is that he automatically, as an Indigenous man, has to be on the defensive
right? Hyper aware all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's draining.
For those that are supposed to protect and serve us,
Yeah.
right? Just because the amount of brutality in that space, just like the healthcare, just like in education,
Yeah.
right? That you're constantly hyper aware. And I'm hyper aware and I don't even have daughters. I only have a son. So, but as we're coming towards the end of this conversation, is there anything else that you wanted to share or touch on before we start wrapping up?
I want to talk about, because I think we're all pretty prominent, powerful, outspoken women when we're put in those places as the Indigenous voice
Yes.
and how we're treated then.
Right.
And though I think they're really well intentioned in placing us in positions like that,
Right.
but often we're the token. Yeah,
Yes.
I sat on a board so briefly for a university, and I was inundated with like 20 emails a day, first of all. And then when we finally had our first meeting it was online, it was during COVID. I was very much the token Indigenous person on the board. Like the whole board was filled with older, gray-haired academic.
Yeah.
They were professors or whatever they were in their day. And then there was me. And the kind of language, it was just so, it was tokenism.
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, post-secondary kind of is really good at checking those boxes and considering their work done, despite the fact that they really need to drive education, right? They are education institutes. They're funded by our governments.
Right.
So they have a responsibility to ensure that they're providing a fulsome education to everybody that tells the truth about this country. And that's what they struggle with, because if they start telling those truths, it means they need more Indigenous people to be in those institutions to help shape the curriculum. They need to create these Indigenous streams. The Senate is all, usually white people, academics. But what would it look like if we had an Indigenous Senate committee that oversaw all Indigenous curriculum?
Right.
Right? But like if you create those spaces, what about all the jobs for the white people? Right?
Well, yeah, and then how do we bring them to the space of being safe people as well?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Creating safe environments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and it's what I hear is us and them.
It is very us and them still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like just that mentality is so ingrained in the settler Canadian mindsets of us and them. I am going to lose out as a settler white person because the Indigenous people are going to get something or achieve something or do something and to me, I'm just like, I'm not here for your power and control. I have power and control. Yeah, I don't need that. Right. And I think let's again call that truth out of we're not looking to take from you.
Yeah.
We're looking to be in relationship with you.
Yeah, but it's that fear. It's that fear that drives the status quo.
Right.
And it's the fear that, change is so scary. And when, settler society is lived this way, it was built for them to exist and to continue to be the power and the privilege.
Right.
It's so scary to be like, oh, well, if we, like I saw a TikTok yesterday about somebody sharing their opinion about the recent land claim
Right.
of the Cowichan in Richmond, and saying how, this is such bad news, and like this is going to really be impact, and like just like you think about those comments and you're like, well, have you actually like learned the history about what we faced and how all this land actually was taken from us,
Right.
and now it's being given back to us in moving forward in good relationship and good faith.
Not without a fight and tons of lawyers and
There
tons
was
of money going.
so much money,
back.
right?
Yeah.
But it's like they think it's their things that we're taking, but it's actually we're reclaiming,
Yeah.
Exactly.
and we have the right. We have the right to reclaim,
Yes.
right? But I'm sorry that inconvenience you as a citizen who owns private property and is paying taxes. Oh, now I got to give this money to the Indians, right?
Or just that solely reminds me of your reaction when the Squamish Nation
Oh, yeah.
announced it was going to be building Sanok.
Yeah.
And just the immense amount of resistance of, again, us and them. And, what do you mean you're going to be successful in terms of a colonial capitalistic, and just, again, so much fear, right? And so as we move to wrap up, like, let's check that. Let's check our fear. Let's really do some digging and get deeper with why is it that you're so fearful, right? What are you afraid of, right? And check that bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious around, and really think about the us and them and the power and control and what is your privilege, right? You know, um, allyship, that's another conversation we're going to have in another episode as well. And I think it also speaks to, again, the complexity and their interconnectedness of all of these spaces, right? Because when you start pulling on, if we're thinking of a spider web, as we pull on these things, they're always moving in tension and strain. And so it's ensuring keeping this balance in this space. And would like to wrap up with my intention, our intention, if I could, speak on our behalf, in this podcast is we literally just want to be in relationship. We want to be in relationship with love and light in our hearts. We want to come from it with, a good space in our minds as well, with the intentionality of we're only here because we want better for our future generations. We want to create, spaces of really good values of equity, equality, inclusion, belonging, rematriation, economic reconciliation, all of these beautiful things that we as humans can achieve together.
Definitely.
Right? Because I speak to about 10 values in Step Into the River, a framework for economic reconciliation that I co-authored with Lila Raphael. And when I share about those values, I'm like, these aren't Indigenous values. When you hear me speak about them, please do not take them that way. These are literally human values that each of us has the responsibility and accountability to move towards. And because I want people to see that, again, let's move away from us and them. Let's move away from power and privilege and control and all of these spaces, and let's wholly own that together and all our relations towards that, right? Is there any last final things that you want to share before we close out today?
My favorite analogy is pie.
Oh, pie.
Pie. I think, if we get these little slices of pie, land back or education directed programming in institutions, like these little, I think they may see it as we're taking something from them. But I think our intention, much to what you were just saying, no, we want us all baking this pie together. So there's more pie for everybody. That's what's going to happen. Exactly. We're not taking anything from you. We want you to come bake with us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
More pie for everybody.
Absolutely.
More pie for everybody. I like that.
I love that.
Yeah. I think for me, I just hope people can come into conversations with an open heart and an open mind, because it's like we said at the beginning, these are very uncomfortable truths. And it takes time for people who don't understand to sort of sit with that and let it settle. And so, that consistent sort of care of, learning little bits at a time. That's you as a settler choosing to be in good relationship with us and wanting to contribute to that pie so that we all have more pie. So, yeah. yeah, that is just sort of how I think about what I wish for the future is that there's less resistance and more openness to even just talk about it. Because when you start to talk to people and you sort of bring it down to a relational level, there's more spaces where there's connection than division.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, when I hear you share about the pie, what automatically comes up for me is, again, how we live our lives in ceremony with protocols,
Generosity.
generosity, right? I automatically go to ceremony and potlatch, where the whole uplifting of that space is relationship,
Mhm.
working together, giving,
Yep.
feasting together, and uplifting governance, justice, economies, right? Knowledge, songs, right? Our wealth isn't built on how much we've accumulated,
Right.
but on how much we can actually give away.
And take care of
Exactly.
our community. Yeah.
Exactly. So I wanted to share that so that people see that that's our intentionality. This is how we live our lives every single day. So when we think about, you know, making more pies, that's where that intentionally comes from, is like we are here to uplift and be in relationship in a good way so that we can all thrive together. My intentionality, never is to take
Yeah.
from anywhere, from anybody, but again, just with our cultural teachings and our just way of being, doing, and knowing is solely based on I thrive because you thrive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. So I'll with that, we'll wrap up this episode and um, call it a day. And I again just appreciate each of you so much for being with me, my co-host Shelley, and Stephanie. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day and uplifting students every single day and honoring us with your presence, with your voice, with your experience, with your knowledge, and your truth telling. Uh, and really appreciate that and really appreciate you taking the time to come and be with us. And I look forward to our continued relationship moving forward. So thank you, everybody, for being with us today.